first thing Ella Coyne felt when she crossed the threshold of the VIP suite was the weight. Not the literal weight of her medical kit or the stethoscope that concealed a garrote wire, but an atmospheric pressure that shouldn't exist in a place dedicated to healing. The air in the dead zone didn't circulate. It sat stagnant, smelling of high-grade disinfectant, and the cold, metallic tang of the 4 Glock 17s holstered by the men in the hallway. This wasn't the peaceful quiet of a recovery wing. This was the suffocating silence of a tomb where the occupant was refusing to lie down. Ella stood by the bed for exactly 5 seconds, her eyes tracking the steady, mocking rhythm of the heart monitor, before she turned to the chief of medicine. Dr. Miller was standing 3 paces back, clutching a clipboard like a shield, his face pale with the sweat of a man who had spent 30 days waiting to be executed for a patient's lack of progress. "Telling me," Ella said, her voice a bright, melodic chirp that felt violently out of place, "that James Mosier has been staring at that exact crack in the ceiling for 720 hours, and your best diagnosis is unexplained catatonia. It's not. Not just that, Dr. Coyne," Miller stammered, glancing nervously at the stone-faced guards. "Dr. Vance and the neuro team have run every scan. There is no physical reason for the silence. The trauma from the ambush was extensive, yes, but the brain is quiet. He is unresponsive to every stimulus we've tried. Vance thinks the damage is irreversible." Ella stepped closer to the bed, her shadow falling across James Mosier's face. He was a man built of sharp angles and dark hair, his beard overgrown, his eyes wide and vacant. "Irreversible," she repeated. She said it with a tiny, secret smile, the kind a predator gives a cage. "Doctor." "Vance is a very respected neurologist," Miller added, adjusting his glasses with trembling fingers. "He's already preparing the long-term palliative care forms. He says we're just maintaining a body now." "Vance is preparing a throne for a king who hasn't abdicated yet," Ella interrupted. She pulled her tablet from her coat, the screen glowing against her dark skin as she swiped through pages of clinical jargon designed to hide the fact that the hospital was terrified. "What do we actually know? Aside from the fact that everyone in this room is scared of a man who hasn't blinked in a month," Miller handed over the digital file, his hands shaking. The data was dense, thick with the kind of language hospitals used when they were trying to describe a miracle or a curse without using the words. Ella didn't look at the charts. She looked at James. She knew exactly what was wrong with him. He wasn't broken. He was entrenched. And she was the only one in the world who knew how to flush him out. Ella adjusted her stethoscope, the cold metal a familiar weight against her chest, as she stepped into the sterile neon glow of the surgical prep room. To the nurses whispering in the hall, she was Dr. Ella Coyne, the girl who had skipped 2 years of residency and possessed hands so steady they were rumored to be mechanical. She moved with a practiced, buoyant grace, humming a top 40 hit as she scrubbed in, the picture of youthful medical brilliance. It was a masterpiece of a mask, polished over years of high-stakes theater. But beneath the white coat, the skin of her forearm bore a faint, jagged scar, the mark of the ghost raven. In the underworld, Ella wasn't known for saving lives, but for the surgical precision with which she ended them. She didn't use crude explosives or messy long-range rifles. She was a phantom of biology. She understood the exact pressure required to collapse a lung without a bruise, the specific potassium imbalance that would stop a heart during a routine nap, leaving behind a forensic trail that looked like nothing more than a tragic, natural complication. Her mission was clear. James Mosier could not leave this hospital alive, but he also could not die a martyr. If he were shot in his bed, the city would burn in a gang war. If his heart simply gave out under the exhaustion of trauma, his empire would crumble quietly into the hands of those who had hired her. She pulled on her latex gloves, the snap of the rubber echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. She looked at her reflection in the stainless steel dispenser. The eyes staring back were wide, bright, and deceptively kind, the eyes of a healer. It was a lie she told so well she almost believed it herself. "Time to check the vitals," she murmured to the empty room, her voice dropping the melodic lilt of the doctor and adopting the flat, cold resonance of the raven. She headed back toward room 502, her mind already indexing the medications on Mosier's tray. A slight adjustment to the heparin, a misplaced decimal point on the saline, it was all so easy. She just had to wait for the right moment to let the doctor fail so the assassin could succeed. Ella didn't just walk toward room 502. She bounced. She let the rubber soles of her expensive sneakers squeak against the linoleum, a rhythmic, annoying sound that broadcasted her arrival long before she reached the heavy oak doors. In her left hand, she balanced a tray of mediocre hospital coffee and a stack of colorful charts covered in heart-shaped stickers. The 4 men standing guard were human monoliths, their suits straining against shoulders built for violence. As she approached, the air grew cold, the casual chatter of the nursing station dying behind her. Dino, a man whose neck was wider than his head, stepped into her path, his hand resting with heavy intent near his waistband. "Back again, Doc." His voice was a low grate of gravel. "And with gifts," Ella chirped, offering a wide, dimpled smile that reached her eyes but stopped exactly at the iris. She extended the cardboard carrier. "The cafeteria finally fixed the espresso machine. Or, well, they tried. It still tastes like battery acid, but it's hot." Dino stared at the coffee, then at her. He saw a 5'4" woman with a bouncy bun and a stethoscope draped haphazardly over her neck like a fashion accessory. To him, she was a soft thing, a civilian, just a girl playing at being a hero. He took a cup, his posture relaxing by a fraction of an inch, a fatal margin in Ella's world. "He hasn't moved," Dino grunted, stepping aside. "Well, that's why I'm here. We're going to try some sensory stimulation today. Music, maybe some light stretching," she said, her voice bubbling with a forced, infectious optimism. She breezed past him, the door clicking shut behind her. The moment the latch engaged, the light in her eyes died. She set the tray down with clinical silence. She didn't look at the coffee, she looked at the stethoscope. Beneath the binaural tubing, hidden in the chest piece, lay the braided tungsten wire of a garrote. She turned to the bed, her face a cold, expressionless mask. "The coffee is drugged, James," she whispered, leaning over his unresponsive form. "They'll be asleep in 10 minutes. Now let's see what you're really hiding." Ella moved with the efficiency of a machine hidden behind the fluff of a morning breeze. She began the sensory stimulation. She had promised the guards, humming a mindless pop tune as she adjusted the blinds to let in a sliver of aggressive morning light. To any observer peering through the small, reinforced window of room 502, she was merely a dedicated doctor performing a mundane physical assessment. She lifted Mosier's limp right arm, rotating the shoulder with practiced clinical care, her face a mask of bright professional focus. "Muscle atrophy is a stubborn thing, James," she said loudly, her voice carrying easily to the door. "We really need to keep these joints moving if we want you walking out of here." She moved closer, leaning over him to check his pupillary response. She clicked her penlight, the sharp white beam cutting across his dark, motionless irises. They didn't flicker. They didn't track. He remained a masterpiece of marble and defiance. Then she lowered the light. She adjusted the chest piece of her stethoscope, sliding it slowly over his heart. She leaned down, her lips inches from his ear, her hair brushing against his jaw. The bubbly lilt vanished from her voice, replaced by a low, predatory rasp that resonated with the cold finality of a grave. "Know you can hear me, James," she whispered. "I know you're sitting in there, counting the footsteps in the hall, waiting for your moment to wake up and burn this city down. But here, the problem, I was paid to make sure you never wake up at all. My wire is thinner than a hair, and my poisons are as invisible as oxygen. If you don't give me a sign in the next 3 seconds, I'm going to stop your heart right now and walk out of here with a smile and a cup of coffee. 1, 2, beep, 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 beep." The steady, rhythmic pulse of the EKG monitor suddenly fractured. The green line on the screen spiked, racing into a frantic, jagged mountain range of electronic panic. His heart rate climbed from a resting 60 to a staggering 110 in the span of a single breath. Ella pulled back, a genuine, sharp-edged smile spreading across her face. She didn't look at his eyes, she looked at the monitor. "There you are," she murmured, her voice returning to its cheerful, medical pitch. "I thought I recognized a fighter." She stood up straight, smoothing her white coat and tapping a note into her tablet. Outside, the guards heard nothing but the encouraging chatter of a doctor pleased with a minor breakthrough. Inside, the air was screaming. James Mosier was wide awake, and for the first time in 30 days, he was terrified. Ella stood at the med station, her back to the hallway, looking every bit the diligent resident. Her hands moved with practiced fluidity, selecting vials of saline and a potent sedative. To any observer, she was preparing a standard recovery drip. In reality, she was counting drops of a colorless, odorless synthetic toxin, a Raven specialty designed to mimic a massive, untraceable pulmonary embolism. She was seconds away from capping the syringe when a shadow flickered in the reflection of the stainless steel cabinet. It was a male nurse, a quiet man named Miller who usually worked the night shift. He was hovering near the intravenous supply line that fed directly into room 502, his movements jerky and uncoordinated. Ella didn't turn. She watched him through the reflection as he fumbled with a preloaded syringe of his own, his eyes darting toward the Mafia guards at the end of the hall. He wasn't a professional. He was a desperate man with a debt, or a mole placed by a rival family who couldn't wait for the ghost Raven to finish her work. Ella saw the label on the nurse's syringe, concentrated potassium chloride. It was a crude, noisy way to kill a man. If Mosier died now under another's hand, the hospital would go into immediate lockdown. The guards would execute everyone on the floor, and Ella's exit strategy would vanish. Worse, her professional pride flared like a wound. No one poached a Raven's kill. Nurse Miller, she chirped, spinning around with a blinding, terrifyingly sweet smile. You're early for shift change, aren't you? The man jumped, nearly dropping his lethal cargo. I was just checking the line, doctor. How dedicated, Ella said, stepping into his personal space, her eyes cold as flint while her voice remained honey. She reached out, her fingers brushing his wrist with enough pressure to signal a threat. But I've already adjusted Mr. Mosier's protocol. Why don't you go take a break? I'll handle the injections today. She watched him scurry away, her grip tightening on her own syringe. She looked toward Mosier's door. To kill him later, she would have to keep him alive now. The irony tasted like copper in her mouth. She emptied her toxin into the hazardous waste bin and drew a fresh dose of pure, life-saving adrenaline. Today, James, she whispered, walking toward his room. If you're going to die, it's going to be because I permitted it. Ella settled into the guest chair, crossing her legs and smoothing the front of her white coat with a rhythmic, soothing motion. To the security camera in the corner, she looked like a tired doctor taking a 5-minute breather. To James Mosier, she was a specter leaning into his private darkness. You know, James, she began, her voice dropping the high-pitched nurse melody for the flat, desert-dry tone of a coroner. I saw the police report from the night you were brought in. It's actually quite funny in a professional sense. She leaned closer, resting her chin on her hand, her eyes locked on his motionless profile. The men they sent to the warehouse, they were amateurs. One of them actually tripped over a crate of his own ammunition before he could even clear his holster. He shot his own toe off. Can you imagine? The great James Mosier, nearly taken out by a man who couldn't navigate a flat floor. She let out a soft, mocking huff of a laugh. They called themselves professionals, but they lacked the one thing that matters, patience. They wanted the noise, the spray, the drama. They didn't realize that the most effective way to kill a king is to sit beside him and wait for his own body to betray him. She reached out, her thumb tracing the line of his pulse point, pressing just hard enough to be felt. If I had been there that night, you wouldn't have felt a thing. You would have just stopped. No warehouse, no hospital, just a quiet end. Suddenly, it happened. A minute, involuntary ripple traveled along the line of his stubbled jaw. It was a micro-expression of pure, concentrated fury, a physical rejection of her insult. The living statue had finally cracked. Oh, Ella whispered, her smile widening into something genuinely lethal. You really didn't like that one, did you? Dino was a man who lived by the secondary senses. He didn't just look at a room, he felt the temperature of the intent within it. For 30 days, room 502 had been a tomb, but since Dr. Ella Coyne had taken the lead, the air had developed a jagged electric edge. When Ella stepped out into the hallway, she found Dino standing exactly where she'd left him, but his posture had shifted. His arms weren't crossed in boredom anymore. They were hanging loose at his sides, fingers twitching near the hem of his dark blazer. His eyes, small and hard like black marbles, didn't move from her face as she approached. You've been in there a long time today, Doc, he said. It wasn't a comment. It was a demand for an invoice of her minutes. And the monitor. The nurses said the heart rate spiked twice. That hasn't happened since the night of the warehouse. Ella didn't break her stride. She let a small, weary sigh escape her lips, the kind of sound a dedicated professional makes after a grueling breakthrough. She reached up, tugging a loose strand of hair from her bun, letting her bubbly mask fray just enough to look humanly exhausted. It's called the Lazarus reflex, Dino, she said, her voice dropping into a soft, confidential tone. She stepped closer, invading his personal space not with a threat, but with the feigned intimacy of a caregiver sharing a secret. It's a neurological storm. We're finally hitting the right sensory triggers. It's messy, it's loud on the monitors, and frankly, it's exhausting for both of us. Dino didn't blink. Vance said he was a vegetable. You're saying he's a fighter. One of you is lying. Ella tilted her head, a playful, slightly patronizing smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. She reached out and patted Dino's iron-hard forearm, a gesture so patronizingly civilian that he visibly bristled, his suspicion momentarily eclipsed by annoyance. Doctor. Vance is a brilliant man, Dino, but he treats organs. I treat people. If you want him to stay a statue, I can put the vegetable back in the bed and we can all go home. But if you want your boss back, you need to let me work the way I know how. She held his gaze, her eyes wide and guileless, broadcasting nothing but medical passion. She could feel the Glock beneath his jacket, inches from her hand. She could have killed him in 3 seconds. Instead, she laughed, a light musical sound that bounced off the sterile walls. Now, unless you have a medical degree hidden under that suit, I suggest you let me go find some actual caffeine. This Lazarus is a demanding patient. Dino watched her walk away, his jaw working. The suspicion was still there, a low simmering heat, but the doctor had successfully clouded the assassin. He took a breath of the disinfectant-heavy air, unaware that the woman who had just patted his arm was already calculating the best angle to snap his neck if he stepped into room 502 without an invitation. The night shift had bled into the early hours of the morning, leaving the 4th floor in a state of artificial twilight. Ella had already drugged the guards, thermoses with a sedative that would leave them conscious but sluggish, their reaction times reduced to a crawl. She checked the monitor. Mosier's vitals were a flat, rhythmic line of feigned unconsciousness. Confident in her solitude, Ella reached into her pocket and clicked a small portable speaker. A low, bass-heavy trip-hop track began to pulse, the vibration barely audible past the heavy door. She shed her white lab coat, revealing a charcoal-gray athletic tank top that showed the corded muscle of her shoulders. She began to move. It started as a stretch, a slow, fluid reach toward the ceiling, but as the beat dropped, the doctor vanished entirely. This was the assassin's dance, the ghost raven's ritual of muscle memory. She spun on the linoleum, her movements a blurring transition from a low sweep into a jagged mid-air strike. Her hands, usually seen holding a tablet or a syringe, were now lethal blades of bone and speed. She shadowboxed the empty air, her strikes silent and terrifyingly precise, targeting the throat, the eyes, the femoral artery of a phantom opponent. She was a whirlwind of dark grace, her body snapping with the whip-like recoil of a professional killer. She dropped into a crouch, spun, and rose into a knife-hand thrust that stopped a fraction of an inch from the IV pole. Her breath was a sharp, rhythmic hiss that synchronized with the percussion of the music. In this moment, she wasn't hiding. She was the weapon she had been forged to be. A sound fractured the music. It wasn't a beep from the monitor. It was a deep, raspy vibration that started in a human chest and clawed its way out of a dry throat. Ella froze mid-strike, her hand still carved into a killing edge, as she spun toward the bed. James Mosier was sitting up. His back was pressed against the pillows, his eyes, once vacant and gray, were now burning with a lucid, terrifying intelligence. His chest was heaving, and his face was contorted into an expression Ella had never envisioned. A wide, jagged grin. Then the sound broke fully. It was a thunderous, rolling laugh that shook his frame, a sound of pure, hysterical disbelief. "Raven," he rasped, his voice sounding like grinding stones after 30 days of silence. He looked at her, his eyes tracking the lethal posture she still held. "My savior is a little ghost raven." He laughed harder, the sound echoing off the sterile walls of the dead zone. The absurdity of it, the world's most dangerous hit woman playing nursemaid to the man she was sent to execute, had finally broken the Kingpin's iron will. Ella didn't move. She didn't reach for her coat. She simply stood in the center of the room, the music still pulsing, and watched the man she was supposed to kill find his life again in the shadow of her own. The laughter subsided into a fit of ragged coughing that shook Mosier's depleted frame, but the intelligence in his eyes remained sharp and predatory. Ella didn't move. She stood in her shadow-boxing stance, her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, her hands still curled into the ready strikes of a raven. The music from the small speaker continued to pulse, a rhythmic heartbeat for the two monsters alone in the room. "You've been awake the whole time," Ella stated, her voice dropping the melodic Dr. Coin facade. It was flat, cold, and ready to kill. "Not the whole time," Mosier rasped, his voice a dry grate of sandpaper. He leaned forward, the motion slow but deliberate, his gaze fixed on her shoulders. "But I knew the moment you touched my wrist on day one. Doctors have a way of handling flesh. They treat it like a specimen. You handled me like a weapon you were checking for a safety catch." He let out a short, mirthless huff. "The way you stood by the door, the way you never put your back to the corner. You're a ghost, Raven. I've seen your kind in the shadows of Macau and the docks of Marseille. I spent 30 days waiting for the needle to go in, just curious enough to see if you'd actually do it." Ella's thumb brushed the hidden trigger of the garrote in her stethoscope, which lay on the bedside table. "Curiosity is a poor shield against a raven, James. I could end this before your guards even finish their drugged coffee." "You could," Mosier agreed, his grin widening to show a flash of white teeth. "Or you could listen to a better offer. The people who sent you, the Morty brothers, they're cowards. They paid you a pittance to finish a job they were too weak to do themselves. They'll dispose of you the moment I'm cold." He leaned in closer, his eyes burning with the dark fire of a man who had seen the bottom of his own grave and climbed out. "Here is the golden contract, Raven. Turn your sights around. Kill the men who signed your check. Burn their empire to the ground from the inside, and I won't just pay you. I'll make you a queen. You won't have to hide behind a white coat ever again." Ella looked at him, the kingpin who had found his voice in the presence of his executioner. The silence of the pact hung between them, heavier than any hospital monitor's beep. She reached out, her fingers closing not around his throat, but around the hand he had extended in the dim light. "The Mortys did underpay," she whispered. "Let's talk about your terms." The morning sun cut through the blinds of room 502, no longer a dead zone, but a war room. Ella Coin sat at the small wooden table, her tablet glowing with the finality of a legal decree. With a few precise taps, she overrode the pessimistic notes left by Dr. Vance and the neuro team. Under the section for patient outcome, she typed 2 words that felt like a declaration of war: full recovery. She slid the tablet onto the hook at the foot of the bed and turned to James. He was standing by the window, dressed in a charcoal suit his men had smuggled in an hour prior. He looked less like a patient and more like a storm front waiting to break over the city. The weakness of 30 days was gone, replaced by a cold, vibrating energy that matched Ella's own. "Discharge papers are signed, James," Ella said, her voice dropping the bubbly lilt for good. She donned her white lab coat one last time, not as a disguise, but as a trophy. "The hospital staff thinks it's a medical miracle. Dino thinks I'm a saint. The Morty brothers, well, they think you're a ghost." James turned, his dark eyes locking onto hers with a look of profound, mutual understanding. "Then let's go show them what a ghost can do when he's found a raven to guide him." They walked out of the room together. Dino and the guards fell into formation, their confusion masked by a sudden, sharp professional terror as they looked at the man they thought was a vegetable. He was walking with a predator's stride, and at his side, the little doctor moved with a fluid, terrifying grace that suggested she wasn't carrying a stethoscope, but a scythe. As they reached the elevator, Ella caught her reflection in the mirrored doors. She looked like the healer everyone believed her to be, but beside the kingpin, the mask was finally irrelevant. They weren't doctor and patient anymore. They were the architects of a coming slaughter. The elevator doors chimed and opened. Ella stepped inside, followed by Mosier, and as the doors slid shut, she reached out and clicked the close door button with a sharp, final snap. The hospital was behind them. The hunt was ahead. "Next stop, Ella?" Mosier asked, his voice low and jagged. "Morty Estate," she replied, her eyes bright and lethal. "I believe they owe me a refund on my contract."